Hello, everybody, and welcome to a Monday afternoon episode of the PHLY Eagles podcast. Bo Wulf, Zach Berman, joined in the middle by our friend Les Bowen. Les, how you doing?
I'm great, Bo.
Happy beginning of OTA season to you and yours.
Yeah, it's a festive season for sure.
Yes, Zach, how did you celebrate this weekend? How are you ringing in the OTA New Year?
Preparing for a week of shows, preparing for OTAs. Yeah, I'm happy they're here.
So when do you get to go out? You guys get to go down there. When do you get to do that?
Sounds like Wednesday. So they are practicing today, Wednesday, and Thursday. They're required to open practice once a week for the media, and it sounds like it's going to be Wednesday.
Once per week, so we will get one next week as well.
Exactly.
And then after that is minicamp?
Yeah, and we get every day of mandatory minicamp. And this is the first mandatory minicamp under Nick Sirianni this season.
I remember the day when we used to go down there every day.
Me too.
OTAs,
I remember that too.
And locker room was open every day.
Yes.
And it actually, this was a mixed blessing for me because as a beat writer, you know you're going to be, there's only so many stories, right? Most years. I mean, some years there's a zillion stories, but most years there's really not. And you're writing stuff and you're thinking, yeah, 2 months from now it'll be warmer and I'll be writing this story again. But
the themes emerge.
as Joni Mitchell once said, you don't know what you've got until it's gone. And now that we don't have the everyday access, it's very, it wasn't so bad to have that, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, not to take the trip down memory lane.
Let's go there.
But I always appreciated this time of year conversing with the players because it was low pressure for them. You're able, even during training camp, they say it's laid back, but training camp's not like spring training. There's a lot of pressure, and there's a lot of pressure on the guys. They're really tired at the end of the sessions. OTAs are laid back by nature, and this time of year, you're able to have more meaningful conversations with the players. You can have things that you store away for later in the year. I distinctly remember
that would require planning.
Fair.
Or a steel trap of a memory. Yeah.
But there's actually one time when the Inquirer needed me to do, for a Father's Day section, Father's Day advice, or like father advice from different players. And I spoke to Malcolm Jenkins, and then actually the next day, my wife went into labor. So the last piece of advice about being a father I got from Malcolm Jenkins.
And what was the advice?
It was actually similar to what Les said, which is you don't know what you don't know, right? And that was kind of the extent. There was a lot more to it. I don't want to speak out of line. I don't want to misquote Malcolm. But it was basically like you don't know what you don't know until you're in that spot.
And Zach, for the people who haven't been following the journey of OTA access over the past decade plus, when did things start to change?
As far as like not being in the locker room, I think most things shifted post-COVID in general.
Yeah.
When now there's a few different.
Were they doing locker room access in OTAs before COVID with Doug?
Yes, they were. With Doug, and then 2019.
Yeah, I guess that's right. Yeah.
Because I vividly remember Zach Ertz, his wife was playing in the World Cup that summer, and speaking to Zach about that at his locker. That was actually the last piece that I wrote for the Inquirer.
Oh, okay.
And then
didn't the Eagles have a bottom of the roster undrafted free agent who was from France, like a wide receiver or something like that, or spoke French? I remember talking about that World Cup. I could be wrong.
It's news to me. Look that one up.
Look it up.
But so then COVID, things changed quite a bit post-COVID. We weren't in there for 2 years. And I should also say that coincided with Nick Sirianni taking over. Not that Nick is limiting the access, but Nick, as I said, has never had a mandatory minicamp.
Right.
So 2020, there was nothing, obviously. That was the last year, Doug. 2021, Nick made a deal with the players. If they came for 2 weeks for voluntary sessions, and then that would be it. 2022, they didn't have the mandatory minicamp last year. The same thing. So there's been very limited spring activity under Nick Sirianni, and it's just kind of become, I don't want to say institutionalized, but accepted that they're not going to open the doors in a big way for you to come and watch and talk.
And of course, Nick's first year, that deal made a lot of sense because typically a lot of veterans don't go to the optional stuff, especially older veterans. it's really not for them. But Nick wanted to get off on the right foot, so he wanted everybody there from the beginning, and he struck that deal. Now, whether it made as much sense in subsequent years, I'm not sure. Last year, you had the whole Super Bowl hangover kind of. That's always a difficult situation,
Sure.
and I understood everything he did. But I think you could see, ultimately, that maybe, the foundation wasn't what it needed to be. And it'll be interesting to see how this spring is different. I think that's one of my main interests in all this is how is this going to be different from what Nick has done these previous 3 years?
From a, like Vic Fangio influence standpoint?
Well, there's that, certainly. I mean, that was my main takeaway from Vic Fangio is he's not going to be, let's give everybody a day off. He's going to want work. But just from, I think Nick
My kind of guy
understands.
right there.
I think Nick understands that this is, you need to get this back on track now.
Sure.
It's not, we just went to the Super Bowl and we lost by 3 points and everything's wonderful and let's just get everybody healthy into the season. That's not the situation.
I'm actually curious, too, in addition to that, and not to get ahead of ourselves, but how that carries over in the training camp, if those practices are going to be more intense, if they're going to have more days. Because you are right, there is this notable change this time of year, and I think it's easy for the Eagles to say, well, the season ended sooner. I don't anticipate. I don't believe that's the reason. I think this is part of Nick troubleshooting what went wrong last year. I think this is part of introducing new schemes. It was the reason why I asked Nick about this at the owners' meetings because I was especially curious. Are you going to approach it differently? Like it was well known around the league that the Eagles
were light.
Were light. They were the lightest team these past few years in terms of spring workouts, and I think we in the media can overstate spring workouts, and we'll get to that in terms of what we're looking like. I can explain what the rules are, but I see there's interest in, well, how's this player going to look against this player?
Yeah.
It's not as if there's like one on, the O-line, D-line are
right. There's no pads.
Yeah, there's no pads, but this is a chance to at least play football, a variation of it, to have an introduction to the schemes. And I think that will be beneficial come the summer.
Anthony Mahangu.
I remember Anthony Mahangu. Good job.
That's
there you go.
what we were talking about.
That outstanding memory
Frenchie.
of Bo Wulf.
Well, I looked it up.
Yes.
You can always count on you remembering the French players, right?
And the
But I
guys from
didn't
Wake
remember
Forest.
it. I had to look it up.
No, but you recall there being a French player.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
of course, because we talked to him about the Ertz having to go to France.
Did you speak in English or French?
I think
in
I
that interview?
did a Eagles Esoterica thing with him about speaking French.
But did you speak in French?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay.
Yeah. I took my French lessons. Madame Cher.
And did you use the
Hairy armpits.
Did you use the pronounced accent? That you,
Yeah.
Did that come out?
I tried to get it as dirty as possible. Yeah. You gotta put the sauce on it, otherwise it doesn't sound
Comment
right.
allez-vous? Yeah.
Yeah.
Did he find that endearing or did he find that alarming?
Yeah, he wanted to kiss me. What do you mean, do you find it endearing?
Wouldn't be the first person, right?
Well, no, certainly not.
No.
All right, Zach. When I think of OTAs, in like what are you looking for on the field stuff from like players? It's obviously not the same as training camp because, like you guys were talking about, they're not wearing pads. To me, it is more like things that could throw up a minor red flag than positives. And it's specifically with like the Lorenzo Booker types is the framing, like the guys who are supposed to be these dynamic athletes in space need to look special and athletic in space.
But of course,
in
Lorenzo
those
Booker
things.
did in OTAs. He
Right.
looked wonderful.
And still
in
wasn't
OTAs.
very good, right? But if he hadn't, then that would have been terrible. It was,
Right.
and like Donnell Pumphrey,
I was
I
gonna
think
bring
this
that up,
is
yeah.
a good example of like when a
Yeah.
guy is that small and you're expecting him to be super dynamic, he better look really dynamic in this setting.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And so
but-
to me, like Aeneas Smith is a player who would be
There you go.
under the
Yeah.
microscope this spring.
If I can kind of because we have the benefit of having you here, I don't want to say test your memory, but
Oh, it's
indulge
okay.
your memory here. Donnell Pumphrey, as Bo mentioned, I've heard stories of him like when he came in, the coaching staff was like, "This is the fourth round running back."
Yeah.
Has there been a guy you've watched out there, and you were like, "Oh, I don't know if this is going to work."
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Several over the years. The first one was Jerome McDougal. Everybody now, narratives get simplified over the years, and now it's, oh, well, he got shot, so he wasn't a great player. Jerome McDougal was an undersized defensive end with a very odd body shape. A lot of his weight was in his lower body, and he kind of had he just wasn't real muscular, wasn't like pass rushers often are like Josh Sweat, lean, long. Jerome McDougal he looked like a guard, and he really didn't do much off the bat. And they kept saying, well, he's so quick, his first step is so amazing. And teammates would say this, but you never saw that manifest itself. I never did. I don't want to be unfair to the guy. Maybe he would have been a really good player if he hadn't gotten shot the night before training camp in, what was it, 04?
I think it was 04, right?
Okay.
He was drafted in
Whichever
03.
Yeah. But I didn't think he was ever, I think they had Hugh Douglas at the time, who also had a very odd body shape, who was not a long, lean pass rusher. And I think they just figured, oh, this guy, he'll be all right. He was at Miami. He was a great player at Miami, and
also forgotten in the Jerome McDougal profile, he was an old 25-year-old rookie.
Yes, you're exactly right. And I remember thinking that at the time, this guy, and he looked older than that too. He really did. It was like
pulling that 21 Jump Street.
Yeah, it was odd. But actually, you had asked me in a text about my memories from OT, and my most vivid memory is from the first one I ever went to in 2002.
Okay.
And I was coming in from having covered hockey, where there's nothing like this. It's a very different beat in that off-season is like a couple months, from the end of the playoffs and the draft until they go to training camp. And you don't see these guys unless you play in their charity golf tournament or something. Training camp is when you see the players the first time. So OTAs, to me, the idea you were going to be watching these guys 4 or 5 months before the season started was very odd. So I go out there the first day, and that was when we were on the field. We were, I was like maybe as far away as from here to that monitor from the running backs doing a drill, and Carell Buckhalter crumples and grabs his knee and starts yelling. And Deuce Staley runs over and is like motioning trainers and stuff, and I'm like, wow, how about that? And he had torn his ACL and was out for the year. But very few OTAs are like that, it turns out. But that was my first day of OTAs, and I was, good Lord.
I believe Paul Warlow's season-ending injury happened in the spring.
It did. That's correct.
It's one of the ones that I remember from we've all become sort of like a nerd to the injuries in practice and football, but just the sort of the cravenness of it, where it's like this guy's who's just fighting to keep his career alive, like his season and maybe his career is over, and 90 seconds later it's all right, everybody back to business, here we go. And in training camp it'll be like move the line of scrimmage 20 yards so that everybody can keep going while this guy's writhing in pain. It's just kind of sometimes a bit of an inhuman situation.
And that was indoors as well.
That was an indoors one. Yeah.
You're right. I remember that
Warlow
now.
was indoors. Yes.
My most vivid OTA memory, if we're doing this, and I suppose this would be on brand, but I think both of you would nod your head accordingly, it was Chip Kelly's first practice.
Yeah, everybody get in the playlist.
Running around?
Well, just at that point, my only exposure to NFL practices, I'd been to a lot of Andy Reid practices. I covered Tom Coughlin with the Giants. And then in college, I covered college football when Frank Beamer and Al Groh, but these were not your quote-unquote new age coaches, right? And so just seeing the way Chip conducted practice.
With the music.
And the speed, and you try to keep notes of each drill, and that's when I stopped keeping play-by-play notes, because everything was happening so fast. If you look down the right, you miss something. Actually, on the 2510 podcast with Deshaun Jackson and LaShawn McCoy 2 weeks ago, when they were talking about everything about Chip, as Bo and I discussed, one of the points they mentioned was the first week of OTAs, they didn't have this depth chart. And it was like Jeremy Macklin was in there with, I don't know if Will Murphy was on the team at the time, but just
they were really throwing Will Murphy on the bus.
They were going. It didn't matter what spot you were on the depth chart. So you had Dennis Dixon throwing the ball to Deshaun Jackson with James Casey at tight end.
Yeah.
And then the next drill, you had Jeremy Maclin with Chris Polk at running back, Michael Vick at quarterback, right? There was no rhyme or reason to it. So you couldn't decipher the depth chart. If you look down, you would miss a play. And he would have, I'm speaking to you guys, but I should speak to the audience as well, because I imagine most fans...
They can hear you.
But unless they went to Lehigh or like they're not familiar with it with an NFL practice. At a lot of NFL practices, there's just the group that's on the field, and then everyone else is around watching.
Right.
Chip Kelly's practices,
3-ring circus.
yes.
Yeah.
So each field would have different drills going on. So if you watched one field, you missed everything that was going on all the other ones, because
Yes.
he did
Yes.
not want
And that
people
happened to me
standing
a lot.
around.
Yeah.
So it was.
That was one of those good changes.
True, but it was
Yeah.
almost revolutionary.
Yeah,
Like watching a practice like that. It's your first OTA practice. They got music playing. I remember. I admittedly I'm not a music guy, but there was this one song that I always associate with Chip Kelly's practice, and it's I don't want to sing it here.
Ooh, I wonder if it's
oh,
the
go
same one
ahead.
as that comes to mind for me.
Who was I'm afraid he might have passed away. The Swedish house music.
Avicii?
Avicii, yes.
Yeah.
Wake Me Up when it,
Yeah.
They would play that over and over again. And I remember I'd be driving to that point, Comcast Sportsnet across the street, and I would just have that song playing
Wow.
in my head. Wake me up. Yeah, so.
For me, it's Starships, the Nicki Minaj song. They played that one a lot.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Yeah. I just
then
remember
they
that
always
was
play
when
the-
I found out about and downloaded the Shazam app.
Yep.
Yes, that was the
'cause
big Shazam.
I never
app
had any
uptick
idea what the hell
for
was
Eagles beat
playing.
writers. Yes, I think they also played Bombs Over Baghdad when it was time for the punters to go. It
Oh,
was
is that
always,
right?
Always like, and then there's like another dropping bomb song. It was like they needed that one to be on brand.
Interesting.
Very interesting.
And they would have Greg D would scream out, when I say Greg D, Greg DiLamitros, the head of equipment, but he would kind of direct people on the field, and he would scream, Riverside, Riverside.
Yeah.
I didn't know what that meant. That was the drill goes to
Other
The other
side closest.
side.
Yeah,
I remember
to the
being
side.
very confused about that in my first
Yep.
training camp
Yep.
in 2009.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Before we keep going, let's talk about our sponsors at Bet Parks, guys, because big betting weekend over the weekend. Had several Game 7s. You had the PGA Championship. Maybe you were involved on any of that. And if you want to keep it going, well, the Eastern and Western Conference Finals are coming up, and you can get in the zone with the Bet Parks Sportsbook app. The money is in the moments. Win big with all-day action. Win your first $10 bet and earn $125 in sports bonus bets. You play for fun. You love to win. You bet. Download the app and play along with us. Must be 21 or older. Please gamble responsibly. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem and wants help, call 1-800-GAMBLER. Bet Parks, baby.
And let me tell you about Mortgage CS, because this is the time of year when people are trying to buy homes or
Absolutely.
considering buying homes. And it's right now, I don't think it's controversial to say that it's more of a seller's market than it is a buyer's market
How
right
dare
now.
you.
I heard an anecdote over the weekend of an open house when there was an offer like right there on the spot at the open house, which means you need to have your mortgage ready if you're going to make an offer. Rates are slightly higher, yes, but home prices are still rising, and Mortgage CS can help you get into a home before they go higher and also refinance to save money when rates drop. Who doesn't love that? The same house with a lower payment. Values are expected to keep going up, so don't put off buying just because rates are slightly elevated. Refinancing with Mortgage CS is straightforward. When rates drop, Mortgage CS will monitor your refinance opportunities and ensure you save money responsibly. You don't want to pay a ton of fees when you refinance, and you'll never get that at Mortgage CS. In the end, you'll be so happy that you texted Ben, the CEO of Mortgage CS, at 267-391-7425. There's a reason people win more with Mortgage CS, so call or text Ben now at 267-391-7425 and see for yourself. You can also go to www.mortgagecs.com/PHLY to check them out or view their 350 plus perfect 5-star ratings by searching Mortgage CS right now.
Did you watch that Deshaun Jackson, LaShawn McCoy?
I did not. I've read
episode?
all about it. I just felt like I got the gist of it pretty well. I understood those two, their careers were greatly affected by what happened to them under Chip Kelly. I think they both would have loved to have spent their whole careers here.
Yeah.
And I think they would be, LaShawn McCoy is the Eagles' all-time leading rusher, but he would have put that mark where nobody else could ever find it had he stayed here.
I think he especially would have been here his whole career, probably.
Yeah. And DeJean never got a chance to really do much in the playoffs after leaving here. And I think he would have, they both would have loved to have been on that 2017 team. And we can talk about whether that would have worked out. I have no idea. I'm not much for that kind of hypothetical stuff. But it dramatically affected the course of both careers. DeJean's reputation because of the circumstances.
Sure.
And I understand. I don't really, the whole Chip Kelly racist thing actually came up. I remember the first time this was brought up was when Trey Thomas left the coaching staff. And Trey said something along those lines. I don't know if it was on a radio show or what. I think it was cultural insensitivity more than blatant racism. I think, Quinyon Barner has spoken up on behalf of Chip. I know Chip was very close to Josh Huff, when they were in college. Right. I don't think it's as cut and dried as, Chip Kelly was a racist. I do think he was a guy with enormous blind spots.
Right.
And a lot of things he was uncomfortable with. And he was from New Hampshire and spent most of his career around a bunch of New England guys. And I don't think he had a lot of chops in trying to deal with people who were very different from him.
Or interest in doing it, right?
Yes.
Yes. There's a difference between malevolence and just being incurious.
Being
right?
blind,
right? And not being interested in dealing with things
right.
that you're not familiar with. And I mean, if enough people in that locker room had that experience, you can't just discount it, right?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree. But it was a fascinating time. And
it was a really fascinating time.
I still, much like with Carson Wentz, I still would love to sit down with Chip Kelly and talk about, you're a smart man. Why could you not adjust, that last year? Why couldn't you figure out how to make things work? What was holding you back from? Because now it all seems like the dry pages of history, but it didn't have to end like that. The team didn't hit rock bottom or anything. It wasn't like they were a 2-win. He could have. They were a decent team, as Doug certainly proved right off the bat. I just don't understand what happened really entirely. But
yeah, I think the prevailing lesson there is I'm saying we, and not the three of us, but let's say
French
media,
sense.
fans, can sometimes forget that these are people working with people, right?
Yeah.
And human dynamics is such an important part of any workplace. But in particular, I shouldn't say in particular football, but football among them. And I think that in that last year, the interpersonal dynamics were what cost the Chip Kelly era to go down, because there wasn't enough built equity in the locker room when things went bad, and there wasn't enough built equity certainly in the front office and in the building when things went bad. And that's why if you act a certain way on your way up, then on your way down, there's not going to be many people reaching out their hands for you if they feel they were wronged, rightfully or wrongly. But sometimes it could be a matter of misinterpretation. Sometimes it could just, but ultimately, like Bo said, if enough people feel that way, when things are going bad, there aren't going to be as many people who have your back. And if you recall the locker room that week when Chip got dismissed, there weren't really people who had his back in there.
There were a few. Brent Selleck,
yes,
who had done very well under Chip, gotten a new deal, and and I'm not impugning Brent when I say it, but Brent felt like that it could have worked with Chip.
Yeah,
and even guys like Kelsey were kind of like, they weren't like jumping on his carcass and pounding it, but There were a lot who were.
And I've been accused on the show of being a chip defender because I like most things, I think things are nuanced and it's not black and white. Certainly no pun intended there. But I think it's a matter of, like, I said this after the that podcast came out, that I don't, and I should say you wrote an outstanding piece during the Super Bowl run where you spoke to Chip. I don't know if the Eagles win that 2017 Super Bowl without Chip's time here, because there were things that Chip brought into the building that the Eagles needed.
Yeah.
There were people that Chip brought into the building that the Eagles needed.
That whole nutrition thing was, it's still there as far as I know. I haven't been in the locker room lately, but there's still there's a whole wing of people that weren't there before Chip showed up.
Yeah, the way people train, the way people eat, the way people. Chip was the first one to really introduce us to the NFL, and now this is standard in the NFL.
Yeah.
I said this when we spoke about it. Jeff Stoutland is here because Chip Kelly wanted him here.
Yes.
Right? There are other people in the building, and there are enough people, too, there are enough good, smart, credible people who stand by Chip. But as Bo mentioned, there's also enough examples of people who felt wronged or slighted.
And he made some horrible personnel decisions. I mean, there's just no way around it.
Chip the GM failed Chip the coach. Yeah.
I think Chip the coach also failed Chip the coach.
Okay.
They kept, what I remember about that last year is all those losses where they kept trying to run the same 4 or 5 plays, and the opposition would just be on the other side of the line of scrimmage as the ball was being snapped, because nobody was fooled.
Right.
And that reinforced to me a lesson that I started learning long ago when I was covering hockey, which is that coaching isn't about schemes and plays. It kind of is, but it's more about the essence of coaching is getting people to believe in what you're asking them to do. Well, if you can do that, then you can run anything really and be somewhat successful. But if you can't do that, you can have the most
and think about how demoralizing
innovative
it must be.
scheme in the history of the world, and it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. College was so different from the NFL for Chip because teams weren't able to study at that level when he was playing against them in college. Players didn't have the time to really dissect things. Opponents didn't, about his offense. By the time he got to his third year in the NFL, opposing players were laughing at this.
Right, and think about how demoralizing that must have been for the offensive line to have their plays being called out while they're about to run them. Of course you're not gonna feel like you're rowing in the right direction.
I don't mean to make this a 2015
let's
show.
We're here.
But one thing that I have heard in just asking around and talking to people is that if you recall, the first preseason game that year was against Baltimore. And
I don't recall.
Okay,
go ahead.
Well, you'll recall when I say this. Terrell
first year.
Suggs, his third
last
year.
Okay.
Sam Bradford's year.
Okay.
The year everything went bad. And Terrell Suggs pummeled Sam Bradford to the ground on the first drive. It was a read option play, right, where Sam Bradford was not going to. He was not going to run.
Now I remember.
But but it was. Suggs is on that play. Suggs' whole thing was to go hit Bradford,
whether he had the ball or not.
Exactly, and the Eagles were livid on the sidelines about it, and the league said that no, he's considered eligible to hit because there's a chance that he could be a runner on that play.
If it's a fake, we're not going to penalize a player for hitting a guy without the ball.
Exactly, and I heard that changed the entire offense because Bradford was like, I'm not running this out. I'm not going to expose myself every time. Yeah,
that was a huge sea change, and it seemed to be aimed right at him too. It wasn't It was interesting. It's interesting how the league adjusts.
KYP, man.
Yeah.
But even when
personnel,
when Nick Foles or Mark Sanchez were the quarterbacks, even after Michael Vick, they carried it out. They kept you honest on the backside, and if you weren't honest, if you can't keep them honest on the backside, now you're shaking your head. You might think that's simplistic, but I literally know there were people in the room who said that changed everything that year.
Yeah, but their offense still it wasn't good the year before. It wasn't as good the year before either. It kept
the
diminishing.
blocking. The thing that I heard was the blocking scheme that I can't. I'm a terrible X and O guy even now, but they had kind of a slant scheme, and people figured out how to get in behind it. And it was like, you're not facing the right way to block the guy. When he makes that adjustment, you're in the wrong spot. And that's a real rudimentary explanation of it. But
you mentioned Carson Wentz in like relation to this, like the guys you want to sit down to and like get to the bottom of what happened. And I think there is an interesting, in my mind, the way I think of it, contrast between Carson Wentz and Chip Kelly, these guys who both had these unbelievable first impressions, were fantastic, and then fell off the face of the earth. To me, Chip was the same the whole time. He did not change, and that was part of his problem is that he never evolved and never adjusted. And whether that's the interpersonal stuff or the schematic stuff, I think like you said before, I actually think Chip the GM is a bit of a red herring and lets Chip the coach off the hook. Whereas Carson was the opposite. Carson, I believe, was as good as we saw, and then totally changed, and something snapped in him. And I don't know if it's all the injuries,
but there was also a refusal to adjust on Carson.
Absolutely, a refusal to adjust, and a hubris about with which he approached the game. I think after 2018 at least, but I don't think that doesn't change the fact that Chip in 2014, that offense, and Carson in 2017, those things were very real. But I feel like Carson's was more of a something snapped here, whereas Chip, the problem was he never changed.
Yeah. When I think of Carson in 2017, and I think I said this, I don't think I said it on this show, so it's brand new.
Say it on the show, yes.
I don't think of Carson like taking the ball, dropping back, and throwing in rhythm. I think of him dropping back, a rusher coming, him stiff-arming the guy and spinning off of him, and then heaving it 40 yards downfield.
Right.
And
stuff
for
that
whatever
might not have
reason,
been sustainable, but
for whatever reason, that disappeared. That whole thing was gone within a few years. He just couldn't do that anymore, or didn't want to do it. He got hurt a couple times, and that might have changed his whole outlook on those confrontations.
So let's spin. Go ahead.
Well, just to add to what I said previously about the human dynamics, I think human dynamics plays a role in the Carson thing as well. Because I think after 2017, the Foles shadow was a big deal with him.
It was a huge deal. And I know for a fact that that's what the Eagles think. That's what management thinks happened more than anything else. Is that, and I can empathize with that. I mean, what a bizarre! I thought the whole time we were covering that, we were both there for the Inquirer. Wentz and Foles on the podium with the confetti going down, and Wentz standing there, patting Nick. This has to be the strangest situation interpersonally. And how does Wentz handle this? How does it work itself out? And we saw, and it worked itself out disastrously.
I remember being struck in the post-game locker room at the Super Bowl by how reserved Carson was. And I don't. And this is not a bad thing against him. That's a very difficult thing to go through. But you would have expected a little bit more joy. And it was much more like, I wasn't here for this. I wasn't part of this. I'm sort of standing in the background.
But to kind of carry my thought a step further, 2019 was the best year he had post. Now there's only 3 years there, but that's because Foles wasn't there and everything was about Carson. And if you recall, when Carson carried them to the playoffs late that year.
With no weapons.
With no weapons.
Big Bob Davis and Deontay Burnett.
Yeah, everything was about Carson. The backup quarterback there, Josh McCown, was there specifically for Carson. And then I think when they drafted Jalen Hurts, that affected Carson because now it's the same thing as like Nick Foles. It's like, and there needs to be a certain strength of mind, I suppose. But that goes back to the human dynamics that I think when Nick was there, and then I think when Jalen was there was just this. It's like, for lack of a better analogy, like an only child, and then you add another child in there, and the attention gets diverted.
So, do you think that if the front office believed that Nick was a big part of his backtracking, like we talked about it the night that they drafted Jalen Hurts, right? Like they're inviting this dynamic back again.
Yeah.
Like they knew what they were doing.
They did. Yeah, I think they just thought if he's the guy we think he is, he can handle it or something.
Right.
The thing I think about when I was surprised that teammates got as down on Carson so quickly as they did. Maybe this relates to what you were saying about building up goodwill.
Sure.
But I would have understood, had I been his teammate, I would have understood him having mixed feelings about this. Do you remember, does anybody remember Wilma McNabb and...
Before my time.
No,
When Cobb was drafted? Or?
No. Well, Cobb, but before that, Jeff Garcia. And the team won a playoff game with Jeff Garcia, and Wilma McNabb said something on her blog or webpage or something about mixed feelings, and people went nuts. Well, she didn't. She felt like Donovan was persecuted here anyway. Now the white quarterback comes in and wins a playoff game, and now what's going to happen?
Right.
And I could totally see that. It wasn't very wise to say that on the internet, but I got where she was coming from there, and the idea that teammates were like, how dare he be a little bit unsettled when somebody, how would they have felt in that situation? I don't know. I was surprised.
So
I really was.
Let me spin this forward to Jalen, because you were talking about how Carson's evolution as a player went from coming out of those pass rushes and being able to make these dynamic plays. We saw a little bit of that sapped from Jalen Hurts last year from an injury standpoint, we think. What are your expectations for the kind of player Jalen Hurts will be this year?
That's the key to everything. I mean, we talk about all these other things about the corners and the safeties and who's going to be the right guard.
Totally.
But if Jalen Hurts is the Jalen Hurts of 2022, the Eagles will be a very good team. I mean, they might not win the Super Bowl, but they'll be a very, very good team. And if he isn't, I'm not sure it really matters who's the right guard.
Yeah.
I don't know. This Kellen Moore thing is a very interesting way to approach it. I think from everything we can see, Jalen is embracing this and, trying to get back on track. But are the things he did last year, and I didn't think he was always as bad last year as people, that everything gets condensed to a very bottom line thing. But I thought he played some wonderful games last year, but nonetheless, I just think he has to be, he has to evolve quite a bit. He has to get back to throwing in the middle of the field. He has to get back to, not that business of just sitting down when you see a running play not looking like it's going to develop. No, don't do that. You're not 80 years old. You don't need to, do any of you think that's a good way to approach, when you get to the edge and there's nothing there, just sit down on the field?
Well, and it's good or bad, we could argue about. From a longevity standpoint, it was notable because it was different, right?
It was different, and it also lost 2 or 3 yards every time, where at least you could have gotten back to the line of scrimmage,
Right.
I mean...
Yeah, there were times when he did not have the explosiveness that he had the year before. Go ahead, Zach.
I concur with this. They need Jalen to be the franchise quarterback, and he was that for much of last season. But there were too many times where he turned the ball over. Sometimes you can put the offense on it a bit, right? Or I should say more than a bit. The offense grew stale, to use Nick Sirianni's term. That said, and I think Jalen would say this too, he's responsible for everything that happens in that offense. He's the starting quarterback, and when he plays exceptional, there'll be an exceptional team. When he plays really good, there'll be a really good team, and when he's inconsistent, there'll be an inconsistent team.
That's very well said. Yes, and I like the way he approached when you guys spoke to him recently. And I'm going to paraphrase because I don't remember his exact words, but he talked about his role as his demeanor and what he needs to project. And I thought he had a very good sense of that, because I don't want him to try to be fake. Sure. I don't want him running around, hey, boys, patting everybody on the butt and all that, because that's not who he is. But he needs to be... He needs to think about what he's projecting in times of frustration. And it's okay to be angry. It's okay to be, to make a point to somebody about, hey, we need to do this. But it's not okay to just sort of sit around looking like somebody shot your dog, And I think he kind of gets that.
Yeah, I think what jumps out to me, personality-wise, because he can be psychoanalyzed, whether from a leadership perspective, from demeanor. But I think the best thing he has going from there is that, from all indications, and again, I'm not in the meeting room with him, but from what I understand, he wants to be coached, right? He's really driven to be better. He's not someone who believes that the way I do it is the only way to do it. And I think that if he can be appropriately coached and appropriately challenged, then he can continue progressing. I think the problem comes when everything is catered to you, and this is going to be incumbent upon him. And now, I was critical of him last year at times when I thought he should have had the backs of his coach a little more. He should have had the back of Nick Sirianni a little bit more. And I said that, and I stand by that. But from what I understand, he really does want to. He's open to new ideas. When he says like being a sponge, he wants to be that sponge. Like he wants to grow.
One problem I think about, and I'm going to put you guys on the spot here a little bit. Jalen and Nick. We saw Jalen's reactions a few times to Nick's histrionics on the sideline.
Oh, yeah.
Do you think there's a part of Jalen that kind of thinks Nick Sirianni's a goober?
Yes. Absolutely. I mean, we've talked about this. Their personalities do not line up entirely to me. And I think goober is a good way to put it. I think there are times when Jalen probably thinks that Nick is acting like a clown.
Yeah.
Now, the bottom line is like what Zach was saying.
How does that work?
Can you get me better?
Yeah.
Like, is he capable of getting me better? And last season, he was not. Like, the scheme was not giving him answers, whether that's on Brian Johnson, to what degree. But, there was Nick's offense. I think that's part of, fissure is too strong of a word, but I think some cracks in the foundation of their relationship. We'll see how that plays out this year. I'm actually, what you said, Zach, made my ears perk up, and you can talk about this as well, but about like Jalen not being closed off to like new ways of doing things. I don't know that tracks with me, because this is a guy who has himself a very small circle, right, and is very protective of the image that he's putting out.
Yeah.
And I think that there is very much to Jalen, like one of one. This is my way of doing things. Don't you think?
I agree with that.
Both things can be true
in terms of his approach, but I do think he's motivated to get better.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
And so that's there was an example. Greg Bishop did an outstanding story in Sports Illustrated on Jalen, and there was an anecdote, and I hope I'm not screwing it up because I'm kind of speaking off the top of my head. But when he was out in California, and he was kind of being coached to do a certain thing, and he said, "You have to let me do this, so I can get it in my muscle memory."
Yeah,
and I
Brandon
think
Brooks solving the problems on the blackboard with Daniz.
I think we use the term intentional. He's very intentional about it. So it is true that he does have a very high opinion of himself, but I also think he's not stuck in his ways.
He's not complacent. I totally agree with that. So absolutely.
Yeah,
and I think if you can apply that growth mindset, to use that term, in an appropriate way, you're going to continue to grow.
And what do you think of their relationship?
Well, I think it'd be hypocritical of me to say that you can't expect Jalen to be someone he's not, and then expect Nick to be someone that he's not too. Because I think I think they're two different types of personalities. That doesn't mean that there can't be symbiosis there. But
I think Nick needs to grow up a little bit too. I mean, I don't want him to be somebody he's not, but you don't need to get into it with fans.
Okay.
You can just not do that. I mean, that's not. I don't think that's changing your personality necessarily. That's just be an NFL coach who isn't
But I think,
the fact that even Jeffrey Lurie at the owners' meetings was willing to say that was a thing that Nick needs to get better at. Right. I mean, that tells you that's a real thing in the organization.
But as far as the Jalen Nick dynamic, I think Jalen needs to feel confident that Nick is putting everything in place to make him better and to make him succeed. And I think
that's very
understandable. If Jalen feels as if, whether it's the offense, whether it's the play calling, whether it's the leadership, if it's not pushing him along to make him succeed, then that's where that fissure comes. I think Nick can do whatever he wants to do as long as Jalen feels like we are progressing.
Yes, that's a good point.
I think that's well said. And if you want to do everything to make sure that your gut health is progressing, well,
And who
Olipop
doesn't?
is here for you because Olipop is the world's first functional soda with a classic soda taste and the benefits of plant-based fiber, prebiotics, and other botanical ingredients to support gut health. Olipop is a new kind of soda with only 2 to 5 grams of sugar and 9 grams of fiber per can. Olipop is available online and available in almost 30,000 retailers nationwide, including the most recent launch at all Wawa stores. A perfect match. You've got a delicious, healthy drink meeting a convenience store, both adored by a cult following, and the 2 flavors in Wawa. The 2 most popular Olipop flavors, of course, classic root beer and strawberry vanilla. 2 out of 3 Americans say they suffer from digestive issues, and 95% of Americans don't get the daily recommended amount of fiber. Olipop is tackling both of these issues with a drink that tastes just like soda, with all kinds of delicious, nostalgic flavors like vintage cola, classic root beer, orange squeeze, classic grape, strawberry vanilla, cream soda, and cherry cola. So, if you want to get in on the Olipop action, use the code PHLY20 for 20% off your next Olipop order. The discount only applies to one-time orders, not to subscription orders. Olipop is sold online at drinkolipop.com. That's DRINKOLIPOP.com, or on Amazon, and it's available in almost 30,000 retailers nationwide, including Wawa, Target, Sprouts, Wegmans, ShopRite, and GoPuff. Olipop, boom.
Ooh,
On Friday,
sound effect.
On Friday after our show with Andy McCullough, which we did remote, I went downstairs, put it on the grill, and put some good steaks on the grill. Put 2 steaks on that I got in my mail, or not in my mailbox, on my doorstep, even better.
Yeah, that would be messy.
From Butcher Box. Because Butcher Box, you can get incredible deals on premium cuts from Butcher Box. Deals this good are hard to come by at the grocery store. Trust me, I know. I've gone to the grocery store looking for these types of deals. I can't get them like this. Butcher Box has high-quality meat and seafood that you can trust. Also, free-range organic chicken, pork-raised, crate-free, and it's humanely raised, no antibiotics or added hormones. It's delivered right to your doorstep. Free shipping always. And they have customized box plans. Customized box plans, not bot plans. That would be odd. The convenience of Butcher Box is incredible because, like I said, you open the door and it's right there. You put it in your freezer. It's ready to go. Fewer trips to the grocery store. Always prepared with meat in the freezer. The value is terrific. The price and savings you can apply to getting all the Montreal steak seasoning you need to put on that steak. Butcher Box is offering our listeners an amazing offer where new users can get free meat plus $20 off your first box. Join today using our link, butcherbox.com/PHLY, and use code PHLY to receive this exclusive offer today before time runs out.
So now 2 steaks on the grill. Does this mean the little Bermans get like gruel or chicken nuggets?
The kids are. The chicken nuggets or pasta.
Okay.
Oh, they don't get any of the steak?
No, I'm not using the fine Butcher Box steak on my kids. They're not they're not eating steak. The steak's for Emily and me. Yeah.
Not even a little bit? Not even a couple bites for the Reed man?
He's not a steak guy. He's
Really? Have you asked him about this?
about the steak.
Harboring
He's fine.
resentment.
You're
feeding him gruel.
This will be the analyst in 20 years is going to be hearing about this.
He likes chicken nuggets. He likes pot. I make him grill. I made him a really good grilled cheese yesterday. So
How'd you make that grilled cheese?
2 pieces of bread and cheese.
No butter?
That's it?
Yeah, I put butter on
There's
it.
On
Yeah.
the pan and the toaster? What
I have like a Foreman grill that I use.
the Foreman grill. Throwback.
Is it?
I think so.
When I was in college, that's what we were using. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
and
you were
how
in
long ago
college a
were you
while
in college,
ago.
Zach?
20 years ago.
Okay, so thereby a throwback.
Okay.
Okay. Les, I want to get your take on. There's the somebody was asking about Nick has gone after this year, and the Bill Belichick stuff is out there in the zeitgeist. And it's true that if they lose a couple games, everybody's going to be talking about the specter of Belichick. How do you feel like this thing plays out?
I wish I knew. I do think they have to have a good year. They have to maybe win a playoff game. They could be 15-2 and lose a playoff game on some fluke, and everything would be fine.
Sure,
but
they could get super injured and still overperform their expectations.
I think maybe they have to win a playoff game in a normal season. If they're 11-6 or 12-5 or something, win a playoff game, and I think Nick's fine. If they don't, they're going to have to look at things. Now, Belichick, I was surprised that he didn't get a job this cycle. I know Jeffrey
What a brave
Lurie's
thing for him to do to go to the Tom Brady roast. So brave.
Yeah. The whole, Jeffrey Lurie, New England, we all think about that. There's no doubt that Belichick is held in high regard, but his age, I don't see the Eagles hiring what will he be, like 73 or so by next year? I don't see that as a Jeffrey Lurie type move, unless he thinks everything is here, all the ingredients are set, all we need is a genius to win another Super Bowl. But I just can't get there. First of all, Belichick's recent career, I think Lurie's got to be smart enough to look at that too. The guy has had no answers for several years now.
Yeah.
And his answers got progressively worse. I'm kind of I don't think that's going to happen, but I can't pretend to be.
But in terms of the noise of it,
on the
and
inside.
Nick having to deal with that.
There'll be a lot of noise about it. There's no doubt about that.
Do you think that bothers Nick?
I don't know. I doubt it. I think he's one of the strengths of his personality, I think, is that he's not real sensitive, But we haven't seen him in that situation, so I don't know.
You see, I think what's interesting about the Belichick thing is this is not like, WIP, and I say this lovingly.
Yeah.
Like, this isn't just filling airtime on a May afternoon or something like that where,
we would never do that.
No, do you want Bill Belichick to replace Nick Sirianni, that kind of thing? No, this is coming from Seth Wickersham, Don Van Natta, right?
Yeah.
This is coming from the people who the owners are reading, right? The people who the GMs are reading, and when it's at that level, when it's not just fans or media in Philly talking about it, but when it's at the league level that this is discussed, when Bill Belichick's on a roast and he makes a joke about Philadelphia, that it's in the NFL zeitgeist. Then, like I always say,
I agree.
There's the things that the fans consume, and then there's the things that like the front office consumes, and that's why sometimes when Howie or Jeffrey are saying something, they're saying something to the other 31 buildings as opposed to like all the fans sometimes. And I think this is something that clearly is in the NFL zeitgeist.
It is, but let me ask you guys this. So Howie Roseman's in a pretty strong position right now, right?
Yeah.
Howie's the guy that brought in Chip Kelly in 2013 and nearly ended his own career inadvertently by doing that. Do you think Howie's going to
Yeah, I think he does not
Bill
want
Belichick here?
Absolutely.
And do you think Howie lacks the clout to just tell Jeffrey, no, this is no?
So I disagree with you guys on this. Like, Howie Roseman's resume since 2016 puts him in rare company. I think Howie's very much interested in legacy and interested in and a second Super Bowl is a significant accomplishment for a GM, especially if it's done with different coaches and different quarterbacks. I don't think the Eagles would be amenable. Well, first off, I think Nick Sirianni's going to remain the head coach because I think they're going to be good.
Yeah,
and I think Sirianni's going to stay. Yeah. So I should preface that. But for the sake of this conversation,
I think that's the most likely outcome.
I don't think the Eagles are going to overhaul a front office or get rid of all these people to accommodate Bill Belichick. But I think if there was a situation where the Eagles didn't win this year and whether it's Howie and Jeffrey think that all the ingredients are in place, they just need a different voice, I think it would be that. I would think, you drive our car. We're not buying you a new car, you drive our car.
I don't know if that fits Bill Belichick at all.
Exactly.
I think Bill Belichick's chasing legacy too,
But I think that's part of why. I actually think that the Belichick moment with the Eagles has passed.
Yeah.
I think it was last offseason
when
it would have made sense.
Yes.
It's actually like you look at who they ended up hiring, like the defensive coordinator who was the obvious best guy available, the offensive coordinator who was the obvious plug-and-play best guy available. Bill Belichick was that option at head coach. And so if they were talking themselves at the end of last season into the reason that we all collapsed is because we have this great roster, but the coaching staff could not get it together. We're just going to bring in the most experienced plug-and-play coaches. Belichick would be that guy. To your point, it would require some significant overhaul, probably. I think, they're supposedly Belichick and Roseman have a good relationship. Things could have started off nicely. I think eventually they would have butted heads in some capacity, and we would have seen how that played out. As Wickersham and Van Natta wrote about, there's a real question about, because he's so old, you don't know how long he wants to be here. Is it worth overhauling the way that we do things for a guy who's only going to be here 2 or 3 years? Probably not. And that's why, if things don't go well this year and Nick Sirianni is out, I think it is more of a refresh, longer-term plan. The one thing that I will say is to the Jalen Hurts, Nick Sirianni, dynamic we were talking about, I'll tell you what, a guy who does think the way that Jalen Hurts does, if you're just trying to get him a guy who thinks like him, that is Bill Belichick. That is the match of guys who do approach things the same way, I think.
But I just want to point this out about Howie, because it's kind of like sometimes, when if you're at a job and someone comes in when they're 25, and then when they're 35, you still view them as the 25-year-old. When Chip and Howie had the kerfuffle, if you will, Howie had never won a postseason game. In his, at that point, 4 years as GM, they got worse each year. Then they went 10-6 under Chip, but they had never won a postseason game. Since 2016, he's twice won Executive of the Year. They've won a Super Bowl. They've been to another Super Bowl. I think the perception of Howie around the league, and certainly, among some of these, I don't want to say tried and because these tried and true NFL guys, but among the Bill Belichicks of the world, I imagine has evolved quite a bit in the 10 years since then.
I agree, but you're talking about legacy. So if Bill Belichick comes here and wins a Super Bowl, do you think that helps Howie's legacy? What do you think that's going to be about in the national narrative?
Yeah, I think it does, but it probably nationally is more of a Belichick thing. But of course, it helps Howie's resume if you put the roster. You're
not
jumping
the
out
same
the seat.
thing.
You want to say something, but I agree. It's not it's not Howie's baby necessarily, right? He would have to share the credit on that. But I think the point of what Les is saying about in a theoretical Howie Belichick marriage is not Belichick's going to come in and kick Howie to the curb. It's that there is a long history of head coach marriages with Howie Roseman turning a little bit contentious over the course of time. And if that were to happen, there is almost nobody in the league who might win that fight in Jeffrey Lurie's eyes, but Bill Belichick is one who has the gravitas to win that.
Well, I'll say something else. This is a little bit of a tangent, but do you think Howie is maybe Nick Sirianni's biggest booster?
That was part of the reporting of the lead up to their big meeting, right? Is that Howie is the one on the phone with people he knows around the league trying to help fill Nick's staff.
Well, here's how I look at it. The coaches Howie has had before Nick were older than him and of a different NFL generation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they had a certain way of looking at Howie, whereas Nick, I think, sees Howie as his bro. And
Nick also has no interest in taking over personnel influence.
I think they are
Nick wants to coach.
I think they're pretty tight.
I would agree with that.
And I think that's a big part of why Nick is still here. And I think Howie will be reluctant to part with Nick.
Well, there was that scene in that game that they played on PhiladelphiaEagles.com last week that Bo and I talked about on Friday's show. But when Howie said you should have, coach GM combinations, or they brought up coach GM combinations, and Howie said to Nick, "You can't name the GMs in the league." And Nick is like, "Yeah, you're right." Because
that's just not on his.
To Bo's point, that's not what.
Yeah.
That's not what Nick wants to do. Nick's not this power hungry coach.
Right.
Nick wants to be the coach of the football team, right? Yeah. And Howie wants to be in charge of the football team. Howie doesn't want to call plays on third down, but he wants to be responsible for all the players on the roster. He wants to help put the coaching staff together. He wants to be in charge of the football team. And so there is a really good symbiotic relationship between the two right now.
Well said. All right, Les, anything else you want to get off your chest before we get going?
Well, OTAs, what would I be looking at if I were out there? One of the things I'd want to see, I was thinking about that this morning, is Isaiah Rodgers. After a year away from
I'm going to add that to my
football,
list, actually.
How does he move? How does he?
Yeah.
Does he look like a guy who's
And
been
that's one
gone
of those.
for a year?
That's one of those positions that you can learn a little bit of something by seeing them out
and
there.
he could be a very big wild card in that. You're talking about rookies, and you're just going to plug in rookies and have them play, and we'll see.
That's a good one.
We'll see.
Well, that's a good tease, Les, because on tomorrow's show at 3:30 tomorrow afternoon, Zach and I will go through all of the little things that we're looking forward to watch when we do get to watch practice on Wednesday. So we're going to have to add Isaiah Rodgers to that list. Zach.
Yeah, 3 things I just want to add to this. I appreciate that because make sure you're subscribing to allphly.com. Les is providing us outstanding written content. We'll continue to have more content. I'm going to have something up later this afternoon when I'm watching for in OTAs, which we'll discuss on tomorrow's show. Isaiah Rodgers is going to be added to the list. We'll get more into OTAs tomorrow, but just to kind of give a refresher, because you're going to hear this, you're going to see it on social media, that today's the first session. No pads are allowed except protective knee and elbow pads. Helmets are permitted. No live contact. They're allowed to have 7-on-7, 9-on-7, and 11-on-11 drills, but no live contact can take place. And then just one other Eagles note from over the weekend, because we didn't get to this at the top, but it's worth mentioning here. There was the Eagles Autism Challenge this past weekend.
Yes.
They had nearly 6,000 participants. So fans like those watching the show who were biking, running, and walking, along with people in the organization. You might have seen footage, and they raised more than $8.1 million to date in 2024.
New record, right?
A new record, yep, and $30 million since it started in 2018. This is Les remembers times when there was like the Eagles Youth Partnership, or there was different. And you do too. I don't. I was just because Les is here. The Eagles' kind of charitable arm, if you will, is now entirely almost the Eagles Autism Challenge, and they've raised a lot of money and awareness for the cause.
Well said.
Yes.
All right, that'll do it for this episode of the PHLY Eagles podcast. Les, thank you for joining us.
Well, it was great to be here.
Wonderful to have you and talk shop. We hope to have you back again soon. We'll talk to you tomorrow at 3:30. Bo and Zach coming at you. That'll do it for this episode. And as always, we love you.
We all silly like the mayor.